On the night of April 14th, 1912, as the RMS Titanic sailed through the cold waters of the North Atlantic. The focus of history would later fall on the passengers and crew. Please subscribe. Their stories, their decisions, and their experiences became the center of everything we remember today. But among those on board, there were other lives as well, quiet, often unnoticed, and rarely mentioned. These were the animals of Titanic, the forgotten passengers whose stories remain largely hidden beneath the surface of history. The Titanic carried a small number of animals, mostly belonging to first-class passengers. These included dogs of different breeds, carefully brought along by their owners as companions on the journey. For many passengers, these animals were more than pets. They were part of their lives, their routines, and their sense of comfort. On a long voyage across the ocean, having a familiar presence could make a significant difference. Some of these animals were kept in kennels on board, where they were cared for during the journey. Others remained in the cabins of their owners, treated with the same level of attention and care as any valued companion. The presence of animals added a quiet layer of life to the ship, something that existed alongside the human activity but did not always draw attention. In addition to pets, there were also working animals, including a small number of birds and other creatures that were part of the ship's operations or cargo. These animals served practical purposes, contributing in small ways to the functioning of life on board. Their presence was not unusual for ships of that time, but it was not something that most passengers would have focused on. As the journey progressed, life for these animals followed a routine. They were fed, cared for, and kept within controlled areas. For the passengers who owned them, they provided comfort and companionship. For others, they were simply part of the background of life on the ship. But when the iceberg struck the RMS Titanic, everything changed, not just for the people, but for the animals as well. Unlike human passengers, animals could not understand what was happening. They could not interpret the sounds, the movement, or the growing urgency. Their experience was shaped entirely by their surroundings and the actions of the people around them. As the evacuation began, the focus was on human survival. Lifeboats were limited, and decisions had to be made quickly. In such a situation, there was little room to consider the fate of animals. Some passengers made attempts to bring their pets with them, but in most cases, this was not possible. The conditions were too restrictive, and the priority was to ensure that as many people as possible could reach safety. There are accounts suggesting that a few small dogs were able to be carried onto lifeboats, hidden or held closely by their owners. These instances were rare, but they highlight the emotional bond between people and their animals. In a moment of crisis, that connection did not disappear. It remained strong, even in the face of difficult choices. For most of the animals, however, the outcome was different. As the evacuation continued and the situation became more urgent, they were left behind. Their fate became tied to the ship itself, part of a story that would end beneath the ocean. It is a detail that is often overlooked, but it adds another layer to the human experience of the disaster. Looking back, the story of the animals on Titanic reminds us that historical events are not limited to human perspectives alone. They include all forms of life that were present, all experiences that were shaped by the same moment. While the animals did not leave behind personal accounts or written records, their presence is still part of the larger narrative. It also highlights the emotional complexity of the situation. For those who owned pets, the decision to leave them behind would not have been easy. It represents a moment where survival required difficult choices, where personal attachments had to be set aside in the face of reality. More than a century later, the story of Titanic continues to be explored from many different angles. The animals on board are one of those angles, a quieter, less visible part of the story, but one that still carries meaning. It reminds us that even in large historical events, there are smaller stories that deserve to be remembered. In the end, the animals on the RMS Titanic were part of the journey, part of the environment, and part of the moment. Their story may not be as widely known, but it adds depth to our understanding of what happened. Because history is not just about the events themselves, it is about everything that existed within those moments, seen and unseen. And sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest.